Last week, towards the end of the parasha, Aaron HaKohen died. And when the Jewish people realized what happened, Vayivku et Aaron, they cried, Kol Beit Yisrael, all of them, for 30 days. What was Moshe Rabbeinu's response? Without question, he mourned. He cried and he yearned for his now gone partner of more than 80 years. But beyond that, the Chumash is silent. But the Medrash isn't. Because in this week's parasha, when Moshe Rabbeinu was told that he would soon climb up to the top of Mount Avarim and pass away there, God told him that he would die Ka'asher Esaf Aaron Achicha, just as your brother Aaron was gathered unto his people. Said the Midrash, Nit Ave Moshe lemitato shel Aaron. Moshe yearned to die, just like Aaron. But what does that mean? The Baal HaTurim suggests that it means that Moshe Rabbeinu saw how Aaron died b'neshikam, painlessly, as if kissed by God, and he wanted that. But was Moshe Rabbeinu so afraid of pain? Rashi suggests that it was a matter of appreciation, that Aaron was mourned by everyone, by Kol Beit Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that. But was Moshe Rabbeinu, the person who spoke panim el panim with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so concerned about that? Which may be the reason that the Ketav Sofer said that what Moshe really wanted was to have his sons succeed him, just as Aaron's sons succeeded their father. Nitaveh Moshe lemitato shel Aaron. And Moshe yearned for the legacy of Aaron. He wanted comfort, knowing that his children would follow in his footsteps. He wanted to see one of his sons, Gershom or Eliezer, take his place as the leader, just as Elazar succeeded Aaron, which according to the Midrash is the reason that this episode, Moshe's death, appears right after God ruled that Tzlofchad's daughters would inherit their father. Said Moshe Rabbeinu to himself, the time has come for me to make my own request, Shirshu vanayet gdulati, that my sons should inherit my position. To which God responded, no. Lo kachal tava machshava lefanai, that, said God, is not my plan. Instead, kedaihu Yehoshua litol schar shimusho. Yehoshua will be rewarded for his service. He will be your successor, said God, which must have been very painful for Moshe to hear, and maybe why this exchange is relegated to the Midrash and is not found in the text, because it's even painful for us to hear, painful to imagine that someone who worked his entire life on behalf of others would be denied not only his dream of entering the land of Israel, but even his final request. And yet that's the Midrash. And as such, it's there to teach us a lesson. One such lesson could be a beautiful, uplifting thought, that Moshe's sons did not inherit his mantle of leadership because Moshe's leadership was as Rabbeinu, as our master and teacher of Torah. And since Torah is accessible to all, it is a morasha and not a Yerusha. Its leadership is never inherited, but earned, which is so very true and evidenced in the tragic stories we sometimes hear, even in our own day, of children of great Torah leaders who try to step into shoes that are much too big for them, and despite their name, fail. And it's also so very true and evidenced in amazing stories we hear, even in our own day, of young men and women who work so very hard, who study Torah with diligence and rise to great heights despite their humble beginnings and lack of name. And yet there is a second lesson I would ask you to consider, a lesson that begins with the fact that Moshe and Aaron were tasked by HaKadosh Baruch Hu with two types of leadership, each important, and yet each impacted their families in very different ways. Moshe was a leader of strength, and Aaron was a guide for peace. Moshe was Rabbeinu, our master, and Aaron was Kohen, the servant. And while these two roles nurtured a newfound nation, the differences had a profound impact on their families. Aaron was always working with others, mediating and teaching, modeling and inspiring. He lived with his family in the middle of the machaneh, surrounding the tabernacle. And he was a person others looked up to and sought for guidance and for advice. While Moshe was the melech. He was above others, literally veiled. His tent was pitched outside of the camp, and he was subject to enormous pressures and forced at times to rebuke and met out judgment. As Rav Soloveitchik explained, Moshe was a person who the masses failed to appreciate. And even when he passed away, only a select group of men mourned him because they couldn't recognize what they had lost. And while this partnership, this synergy of these two leaders brought the Jewish people to the promised land, what did it do to their families? Two of our own sons were killed for their failings, but all of them were reared at our own side. They saw Aaron interact and they saw him serve. And ultimately, when the time came, Elazar was prepared to succeed and his grandson Pinchas was prepared to act. But Moshe, his leadership was sui generis. His task was too big, too overwhelming, and too all-consuming. And tragically, his sons were reared at a distance, leaving the stage of Jewish history almost as soon as they appeared, only to reappear via brief mention later in history when Gershom's son served as a pagan priest in the north of Israel, which is the second lesson of this midrash, a lesson about family and about children, and a reminder that each of us needs to find balance in our life, because we, unlike Moshe, have a choice, and therefore we should never let our communal or business lives overtake our familial opportunities, which may have been a silver lining of these past months of staying at home. Not only did we have a chance to press the reset button, but we had the opportunity to be with our children, with our spouses, our families like never before. Even Zoom succeeded to bring people together like never before. The opportunities of family were more present than ever before. A couple of weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article that caught my attention, written by two professors, one at Brown and the other at Baylor, and the title was, "Work-Life Conflict Can't Be Solved." And that's a good thing. Its basic premise was that there will always be tension between our many responsibilities, and yet that tension can be helpful because it gives us different outlets and opportunities. And as proof, it offered a few studies, including the reduced level of burnout among Israelis who have to leave their work for extended periods of time to serve in Miluim, in the Israeli Army Reserves, and the problems that were created by kibbutzim when they tried to relieve parents of their responsibilities and created the now defunct children's houses away from the family home. But this midrash teaches us is a simple lesson. Be involved and be committed. Find a profession and find a passion, but be there with your children and have them be there at your side. As I once heard about the mitzvah, Vishinantam Levanecha, our obligation to educate our children, that while we teach Torah, through the words we say and the messages we articulate, the real lessons are B'shiftecha b'veitecha, through our actions and behaviors when we're at home, Uvelechtecha v'derech, and we're on the road at work. Because of his divinely ordained role, Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't be there for his family as he wanted, and the consequences troubled him to his final days, while Aaron was. And while it was not easy or simple and not always successful, Aaron's children continued his mission, inherited his mantle, and served our people. And like them, we have a choice. And while we're still largely at home, now is the time to use that choice to create the legacy and the future for our families. Shabbat Shalom.